Welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into defining target behaviors, one of the most fundamental and most tested skills in applied behavior analysis. We'll focus specifically on operational definitions and social validity, because these concepts show up everywhere on the BCBA exam, in assessment questions, measurement questions, intervention planning, and ethics. If you've ever been stuck between two answer choices that both sound right, this topic is usually the reason why. By the end of this video, you should be able to clearly identify strong definitions, eliminate weak ones, and approach these questions the way a BCBA is expected to think. When the BCBA exam asks about target behaviors, it's not asking you to define a term from memory. It's asking whether you can think behavior analytically. Strong answers always prioritize observability, avoid mentalistic language, and clearly support measurement. A helpful mindset is to imagine that someone else has to collect data using your definition. If the definition leaves room for interpretation, disagreement, or guessing, it's probably not the best answer. And this exam tip is critical. If a behavior cannot be directly observed, it cannot be measured, and it cannot be analyzed. Target behaviors are the specific responses selected for change. They are chosen intentionally, defined clearly, and measured consistently. One important exam point here is timing. Target behaviors are defined before intervention begins, not after. They also must be measured objectively, not based on opinion or impression, and they should always connect back to meaningful goals for the client. The exam will often contrast well-defined target behaviors with vague labels to test this distinction. This slide explains why definitions matter so much in ABA. Clear definitions improve measurement reliability, meaning different observers are more likely to record the same data. They also support treatment integrity. Staff can only implement procedures correctly if they know exactly what behavior they are targeting. From an exam perspective, poor definitions often lead to secondary problems like low IOA, inconsistent data, or ineffective interventions. So when you see a question about data problems or observer disagreement, always consider whether the definition itself is the root issue. An operational definition describes behavior in observable and measurable terms. It specifies what the behavior looks like when it starts and when it ends. Most importantly, it allows the behavior to be identified consistently across observers. On the BCBA exam, operational definitions are preferred over general descriptions, labels, or diagnostic terms. If a definition could be applied differently by two trained observers, it is not truly operational. Strong definitions use objective language, words that describe what can actually be seen or heard. They require no interpretation and no guessing. Clear inclusion criteria specify exactly what counts as the behavior, while exclusion criteria clarify what does not. This is where the exam likes to trick you. Vague terms often sound professional, but they don't hold up under measurement. Anytime you see words like aggressive, refusing, or uncooperative, pause and evaluate whether the behavior is truly defined. Topography-based definitions describe behavior based on form, what the behavior looks like. These definitions stay the same regardless of why the behavior occurs or what consequence follows. For example, walking is defined by movement, not by whether the person is going to the store or leaving a demand situation. On the exam, topography-based definitions are often used in skill acquisition or when precise physical description is required. Function-based definitions describe behavior based on what it produces or achieves. Instead of focusing on form, they focus on the relationship between behavior and consequence. Multiple topographies can be grouped together if they serve the same function, such as escape or attention. A very important exam distinction here. Function-based does not mean mentalistic. You are still describing observable relationships within the ABC framework, not internal states or intentions. Writing a behavior definition is a structured process. First, name the behavior clearly. Then describe exactly what the person does, not what you think they feel or intend. Boundaries matter. Define when the behavior starts and stops. And finally, remove assumptions. A strong exam answer is always one that another observer could apply consistently without additional explanation. This slide highlights a very common exam format, comparing poor definitions with strong ones. Words like aggressive or non-compliant are labels, not behaviors. Strong definitions replace labels with specific, observable actions. Diagnostic terms are especially tempting distractors on the exam, but they never function as operational definitions. Definitions and measurement must align. If you're measuring frequency, the behavior must be clearly countable. If you're measuring duration, onset and offset must be clearly defined. Ambiguous definitions lead directly to poor data, and the BCBA exam frequently tests this connection. A key concept tested on the exam is that observable does not always mean measurable. The child is running is observable, but it doesn't tell us how to collect data. Precision, such as duration or frequency, is what allows consistency and supports ILA. Many measurement errors start with vague definitions, not poor data collectors. Social validity asks whether the target behavior is important and meaningful. Does it matter to the client's daily life? Is the behavior change acceptable to caregivers and stakeholders? And whose values are guiding the decision? These questions matter ethically and practically, and yes, they are tested on the exam. Now we're moving into social validity, which is where many students underestimate the exam. A target behavior can be perfectly observable and measurable and still be the wrong choice. Socially valid target behaviors are those that are meaningful to the client, relevant to daily functioning, culturally appropriate, and ethically justified. On the BCBA exam, social validity often shows up indirectly. For example, you might be asked which behavior should be targeted first, or which goal best reflects client priorities. A common trap is choosing a behavior simply because it's easy to measure or bothers staff, rather than because it meaningfully improves the client's quality of life. This slide is critical because it reflects how this topic actually appears on the exam. You'll usually see a short scenario describing a client and a concern, followed by multiple definitions. The exam is not asking, "Do you know the definition of operational?" It's asking, "Can you evaluate definition quality under pressure?" Some options will be vague, some will include diagnostic labels, and some will partially define behavior but fail measurement requirements. Your job is to select the definition that is most operational, most measurable, and most socially appropriate, not just the one that sounds professional. When you're choosing the best definition on the exam, you should use a systematic decision process, not intuition. First, ask whether the behavior is directly observable. Next, check whether it has clear start and end points. Then ask whether the language minimizes interpretation. Finally, consider whether the definition clearly supports data collection. If two definitions are both observable, the more precise one almost always wins. This slide is essentially a step-by-step strategy for eliminating distractors. The BCBA exam relies heavily on traps, and definition questions are full of them. Mentalistic explanations are one of the most common. Words like frustrated, refusing, or seeking attention sound clinical, but they describe inferred states, not behavior. Another trap is overly broad definitions that group too many responses together without clear boundaries. And finally, definitions that don't align with measurement systems are almost always wrong, even if they sound detailed. This slide bridges exam content with real-world practice, something the BCBA exam increasingly emphasizes. Definitions fail when they rely on subjective judgment instead of observable criteria. They also fail when observers can't apply them consistently across settings or people. Poor training makes this worse, because unclear definitions require clarification, which defeats the purpose of an operational definition. On the exam, these failures often appear as low inter-observer agreement, inconsistent data, or ineffective interventions. Here's the big picture connection. Defining target behavior is not a small step. It sits at the center of the entire ABA process. Without clear definitions, assessment data are unreliable. Measurement becomes inconsistent. Interventions lose precision. And evaluation of effectiveness becomes meaningless. This is why the exam tests target behavior definitions across multiple domains, not just in one section. Ethical considerations are inseparable from target behavior selection. As BCBAs, we are required to respect client dignity, minimize restriction, and involve stakeholders in decision-making. The exam may present ethically questionable targets and ask you to identify the most appropriate alternative. A key exam principle here is that effectiveness alone is not enough. Goals must also be ethically justified and socially meaningful. If a target behavior reduces inconvenience but doesn't improve the client's life, it's probably not the best answer. This slide gives you a reliable mental checklist for definition questions. Ask yourself, is the behavior observable? Is it measurable? Is it clearly defined with boundaries? Is it socially valid? If an option fails even one of these criteria, eliminate it. This approach turns complex questions into a manageable decision process, which is exactly what the exam is testing. Target behavior definitions connect directly to other major BCBA content areas. Measurement systems rely on precise definitions. Functional assessments depend on clearly identified behaviors. Behavior change procedures require well-defined targets. And treatment integrity depends on everyone interpreting behavior the same way. Weak definitions create problems everywhere, which is why this topic is foundational. Let's consolidate the most important points. Definitions drive data quality. Precision matters more than terminology. Behavior is not a label or diagnosis. And social validity is essential, not optional. If you remember these principles, you'll be able to handle almost any definition question the exam throws at you. On exam day, slow down on definition questions. Read each option carefully. Eliminate vague or mentalistic language. Prioritize observable, measurable wording. And always answer as a BCBA, considering measurement, ethics, and real-world implementation. If you want to practice applying these skills under exam conditions, try a free full-length BCBA mock exam using the link below. Practicing realistic scenarios is one of the best ways to build confidence and sharpen decision-making.